Funding for New Mexico in Focus provided by the McCune Charitable Foundation. And viewers like you.
This week on New Mexico in Focus, reflections on protecting our environment in 2022 and beyond.
My life is worth fighting for. The lives of my generation and the generations to come are worth fighting for.
Plus, breaking down the top 5 stories of 2021 with a special line opinion panel. New Mexico in Focus starts now. Thanks for joining us this week. I'm your host, Gene Grant. Environment reporter Laura Paskus reached out to several of her sources for thoughts and insights on climate change and how we get serious about addressing its impacts. We'll sprinkle those video essays into this last show of 2021. But first, we tackle the top 5 stories of the year that was. Here's the line with more. Joining us again this week over Zoom, working journalists from across the state. These folks work tirelessly every day to bring you the news, and we thank them for taking time out of their busy day to help us reflect on another historic year. First up from the Albuquerque Journal-Capitol Bureau, we welcome back Dan McKay. Also with us is Jessica Unsuras. She's the news director at the Carlsbad Current-Argus. And we welcome back Algernon Damasa from the Las Cruces Sun News. Rounding out our virtual roundtable is our friend Julianne Grimm, editor and publisher of the Santa Fe Reporter. Our number 5 story of 2021 is still a work in progress as we record this segment. We're talking about the once-a-decade exercise in redistricting. New Mexico lawmakers changed the redistricting process this year to try and take politics out of the equation. And Dan, do you think it has been successful given how the special session has played out so far as we're taping this?
I've actually been thinking about that. The whole session is to sort of see how much of the redistricting principles that came, the concepts that came out of the Citizen Redistricting Committee, which was a panel that could not consider partisan data and also de-emphasize incumbent addresses in its work. How much of their work ends up surviving the session? And that is one of the debates that's playing out right now. There's been kind of a deadlock on the Senate side for some legislative seats with Native American Pueblo governors, tribal government representatives at odds with a plan that would protect some incumbents and shore up a few folks' political support in their districts. So I think the answer is to be determined.
Right, yeah, good point. Algernon, representation was a big issue from the beginning. Critics of the new CRC pointed to a lack of rural and Native American representation. Both of those issues have carried through during the legislative debates so far. So did the process overcome those concerns or not?
Yeah, I mean, there's still a lot to learn about that. And there's different conversations to be had. Are we talking about our congressional district or are we talking about local legislative districts? There's a very interesting shape emerging to the congressional district, the 2nd congressional district of New Mexico, which for a long time has encompassed just the bottom square of southern New Mexico and a little bit of Bernalillo County. I think it becomes very interesting. That district presents a lot of challenges for a candidate to appeal not only to various ethnographies and including Native American communities, but also somebody who can speak to people from the agricultural rural districts, as well as the oil and gas production sector of the Southeast. And based on what the district might end up looking like, a lot more voters from around the Albuquerque metro region. I think that for any candidate of either of our dominant parties, that presents some unique challenges. And as far as the local legislative districts, we're still waiting to see how that starts to look.
Good point there. Jessica, the original bill to change this process would have given the commission the ability to select the final maps. But some lawmakers said that was unconstitutional and that lawmakers had to have a say and be able to amend the proposals. But isn't that the only way to truly take politics out of this once-in-a-decade process?
I would agree with you and say, yeah, that is the only way to truly eliminate politics from this process. But they did have a point. This is a process written into our Constitution as belonging to our legislative body, and so they are undertaking that work now. And I think that, just to echo what Dan said, that we are seeing what is happening in this special session reintroduce some of those political issues straight back into the process. So all of the good work that was done by the committee beforehand might just be lost in what is happening in Santa Fe.
Mm-hmm. Julianne, as we've mentioned, lawmakers are still hashing this out at the time of this taping, and there's always a chance the final maps get vetoed by Governor Lujan Grisham, or there is a court challenge. But as things stand right now, how do you think redistricting will impact next year's midterm elections?
I mean, it's, you asked me the similar question for last week's show that we taped just a few minutes ago, and I'll kind of repeat what I said, which is that, like Dan mentioned, the redistricting committee wasn't supposed to take into account partisan information, but we see that these maps that are coming out of the Roundhouse have been changed in some cases significantly, in some cases in kind of more minor ways, but some of the considerations that are being made have to do with performance in a future election. And so one of the interesting things for Santa Fe, it has to do with Congressional District 3, which is Algernon pointed out is the companion. It was the northern block of the state. But now the maps that have headed to the governor for signature, they really divide the state on this sort of bias lines. And so you've got Santa Fe and Rio Arriba County are actually in the same congressional district as part of the city of Hobbs. Yeah. And so, trying to find a candidate who can gather votes from both of those parts of the state, I think, could really introduce an interesting, kind of candidate that we've never seen. I think that, too, you heard some discussion when particularly folks from from CD2 were saying, you can't put us into CD3. That's just crazy. You have other people from the north saying, are we going to have an oil man representing us? So I think it's really the voters are going to determine that.
You've set up my next question to Dan just beautifully. Dan, your newspaper, the Albuquerque Journal, had a very thought-provoking editorial about this redistricting process, and your paper is advocating for the governor to, in fact, not accept these maps because, as Julianne mentioned, there's the potential that the more urban-based candidates just won't have a feel for the rural parts of their state, and that the power will just slowly over time just go right back to the urban centers. I really encourage folks to check out this editorial, but do pick up on that, where your folks were coming from and how this process might turn next.
Well, I should first say I'm not involved in the opinion side of the newspaper, but yeah, there's definitely a potential where you could have an Albuquerque congressperson representing Southwest New Mexico and Hobbs and Las Cruces. You could, if somebody emerged out of Rio Rancho, you could have candidates, you could have all three Congress people be concentrated in the metropolitan area.
Right.
The reverse is also true. You could end up with, maybe there's a strong candidate from Lee County in the oil patch, and in a presidential midterm election where Republicans are expected to make gains in Congress, perhaps you end up with an oil executive representing Santa Fe. There are all kinds of interesting potential dynamics, and it looks to me like all three seats, if this stands, will be more competitive. Rather than having two safe Democratic seats and a relatively safe Republican seat, you're probably going to end up with more competitive races all around.
Jessica, real quick, if CD3, what's been the scuttle down there? Because when you look at the map that's proposed now, wow, it's a very different district than we've been used to forever.
Right. So no, I think to echo what Dan was saying, we are really interested in this idea of a more competitive race, right? Are we going to be seeing that diversity come to this part of our region? But I think probably the larger conversation is, in reality, how based in reality is it to think that we will have a person from southern New Mexico represented or be elected to represent us in that seat. I think we see it as a power move, a way to dilute a conservative portion of the state. And I think a lot of people here will tell you that they are truly, truly concerned that they will end up being ignored by whoever is duly elected to that seat if they come from a more metro area.
Good stuff there. We'll stay with the legislature for our number 4 story of 2021. It was years in the making and took a special session, but state lawmakers did legalize recreational use cannabis this year. It's been a frantic race to get the industry up and running by April of next year. Julianne, were you surprised that it got done in 2021? Just a simple question.
No, I mean, I actually expected it to happen the session before and was, kind of lost a bet on that one. I think that, it was high time, as people say, for New Mexico to do this, especially considering what our neighbors have done and the position that we have in the industry with our longstanding medical program. I think what's really crazy, though, right now is what's happening on the local level as these local jurisdictions take what little control the state has left for them and they make decisions about zoning. We've got new news out of Bernalillo County that they don't want anybody to smoke cannabis outside. And you may remember my being incredulous on this program previously when Santa Fe County said they didn't want anybody to grow cannabis outside. I'm not really sure what these local lawmakers, think they're accomplishing by sending everything inside, especially in a place like New Mexico where people so value being outside. But, Santa Fe County did the same thing with respect to the consumption areas that Bernalillo County did, which is, you're a retailer, you want to allow people to enjoy your product, you have to build a room and they have to do it under a roof. And I don't know if that will really persist over time, but right now we're really seeing this patchwork.
Interesting points there. Algernon, are we rushing things in terms of the rollout, though? Licenses are taking a while to be issued, and time is running short for manufacturers to have plants in the ground and producing flowers in time to have product on the shelves by next spring.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the challenge, is that the legislative deadlines put things on a very tight time clock as far as having a rulemaking process that really allows for public input. And I think, honestly, as has been acknowledged from Santa Fe and throughout the industry, is we'll have to go back to the legislation and we'll have to go back to the rulemaking and make adjustments as reality sets in. And also and the conditions are going to be different in different parts of the state. I mean, Julianne talked about how some local bodies are saying we don't want people growing cannabis outdoors. Well, in Doña Ana County and Luna County, growing it outdoors is not even really a practical option because of the winds that we have down here. And so that forces production into greenhouses and structures that have to be built and they have to be secured and maintained. And I think that there's just a lot of unknowns. And so at the same time that we have to work really fast to get everything in place, get seeds into the ground, and get things ready by the statutory deadlines so that the marketplace opens with options, inevitably we're going to have to go back and make adjustments.
No doubt about it. Even lawmakers themselves were saying that's a possibility in real time. They were saying it back then. Jessica, still a fair amount of concern that this is an industry that's accessible to all New Mexicans, meaning what's the sense or the excitement level in southeastern New Mexico? Can folks afford to get in the game, as Algernon just sort of pointed out?
Well, you'd be surprised. There's a lot of people here talking about what they would need to, trying to better understand the rules to see what they would need to do to get in the game, as you say. But I also think that there is still a lot of, as Algernon put it, a lot of questions about what that means, right? We were talking to a development group here in Eddy County earlier, and they go in and they build these metal buildings, and they said that they are seeing a lot of people come to them and ask, what would it take to build a greenhouse for me? Like, what kind of investment are we talking about here? So there are definitely a lot of inquiries being made, not only on the practicality of facilities, but also we're seeing a lot of our really small, what we call security groups in this region, get a lot of inquiries too about what would it take to secure a facility if we decide to go into this business.
Interesting. Interesting. I would not have thought of that. That's interesting. Dan McKay, what's the bump here for New Mexico as a state? You know, as the state's agricultural center, are people seeing lots of opportunity on the horizon?
You know, I don't know that it's going to be necessarily a huge revenue source for the state, so much in terms of actual revenue, so much as it's an attempt to diversify the economy and add some different agricultural opportunities. I think, you know, as the other panelists have touched on, you know, there is definitely a challenge in access and, you know, how many people really have the startup money, the capital to enter the business, I think is still a question.
Mm-hmm. Julianne, I got to ask you this. I got to wonder sometimes, you know, during this whole process, did we in fact did we miss a window on the amount of money that we could have potentially pulled in for tax revenue here? I mean, Arizona legalized, of course, Colorado beat us by years, but Texas doesn't look like it's going to move in that direction. Looking at the regional map, where does New Mexico sit in your mind?
Well, Texas really seems happy to send people over the border to New Mexico for whatever it is that they don't want to deal with in their state. You know, some of my family's from Texas. I got no problem really with Texans, but we're definitely going to see some crossing the border tourism, cannabis tourism that they call, you know, consumer purchases going on. I think there's a lot of people today who are driving through New Mexico up to Colorado from Texas to make those kinds of purchases. And so, you know, all the economic forecasts that were used during the legislative session in the last couple, when they were really debating this, they allocated some portion of the revenue that we could expect as a state to be coming from this tourism idea. And we know that, you know, people come to New Mexico again for a variety of reasons. And I think there's definitely an advocacy group that says, let's bring people here for cannabis. I think though, above and beyond that, you know, New Mexicans are using cannabis. And New Mexicans buy a lot of alcohol, and New Mexicans are going to buy a lot of cannabis. I don't think there's any dispute about that, in so much as there's going to be cannabis for New Mexicans to purchase, given what some of the other panelists touched on. You know, we've heard from the director, the superintendent of the RLD, that they fully expect there to be a supply shortage. And so that's what we can look forward to. And I think, again, you're going to see the local jurisdictions try to take advantage of their taxing authority, try to put the cannabis revenue, that new gross receipts tax revenue, to specific purposes in their community. So we'll see what happens.
Good point there. Dan, I got to ask you, is there any, you know, the economic revenue projections, I remember just a few years ago, it was like 200 million, 250, then suddenly it was, you know, half that. Now it was like 50 million, something like that. What happens if we don't get a significant bounce? What happens to the idea of legalized marijuana?
Yeah, I don't think we know the answer to that. That is a good question. I mean, these revenue forecasts really have bounced around a lot. And as you mentioned, I feel like the early estimates were much more substantial than the more recent estimates. It seems like they keep coming down, and it could just be that economists are trying to be conservative, or it could be, you know, the question you asked earlier about did we miss the boat, and now so many other places have legalized that we won't have as much of the market. You know, there's a lot to be determined by about this, and we'll see. And as you know, we talked earlier, local policymakers are adding restrictions
That's right.
that may make the industry a little more difficult to thrive.
As Algernon mentioned earlier, we're going to revisit all of this down the road. There's no question. We're just getting started with our countdown of the top 5 stories of 2021. But before we learn what number 3 is, let's pause for some thoughts on climate change and its impacts here in New Mexico. We reached out to several individuals to get some personal reflections as we head into a new year. First up, ecologist and UNM professor Matthew Hurto. We'll hear from him.
I'm Matthew Hurto, a professor in the biology department at the University of New Mexico. As an ecologist, I could share with you a variety of facts about how climate change has caused the fire season length to double over the past 40 years in the Southwest, or that the area burned by tree-killing wildfires increased dramatically because we have been excluding fire from our landscapes. But I don't think that does a good job capturing how I feel about the challenges we face in the Southwest. Instead, I want to talk to you about the past 2 fire seasons, which have been especially tough for me and my colleagues. Last year, a landscape that I've worked in for 19 years burned in the Creek Fire in California. When I drove into what was a forest of large, beautiful trees this summer on my way to collect data, I felt like a failure. And I felt a great sense of loss. The loss comes from the fact that I love hanging out in old-growth forest and I love big trees. Those are 2 things the Creek Fire landscape won't have again over my lifetime, if at all. The sense of failure comes from the fact that we in the forest and fire science research community know how to prevent this from happening. We have decades of research that demonstrate the importance of the right kind of fire in these ecosystems. Here in New Mexico, we've been pretty lucky the past couple of years, but that luck won't last. As the temperature continues to climb, the atmosphere acts like a giant sponge sucking moisture out of our forests. And as anyone who has ever built a campfire knows, dry wood burns far easier than wet wood. Climate change is compounding the fact that by excluding fire from our forests for over 100 years, there's way more fuel to burn than there should be. While we in New Mexico need to do our part to slow how quickly the climate is changing, climate change is a larger problem than we can solve locally. What we can change locally is the effect that climate change and wildfire have on our forests. We can restore the right kind of fire. There are people who will tell you that we can continue to put out fires, and those that will tell you that big, hot fires will correct the problems we have created. Neither are correct. No matter how much money we spend, we are never going to stop all wildfires, especially the ones that burn under extreme conditions. But fire is both the threat and the answer. Prescribed burning and managing lightning-caused fires are the 2 primary tools we have for changing the risks we face from large, fast-moving wildfires. By bringing back the right kind of fire, we reduce the amount of fuel in the forest, and just like in a campfire, less fuel means less extreme wildfires. As New Mexicans, we can support land managers in their efforts to restore the fire our forests need by being tolerant of smoke from prescribed burns, and by telling our elected officials that we need to fund fire management and not just fire suppression. The research on the importance of fire in our forests is clear. It is up to us to act.
Thank you to Matthew for those thoughts. We'll have more climate change takes throughout the show. Now back to the line in our countdown to the top 5 stories of the year. Coming in at number 3 is, coincidentally enough, climate change and its impacts here in New Mexico. The drought conditions just keep rolling on. We've got the Rio Grande drying in parts of Albuquerque this summer, and fire officials are bracing for a terrible wildfire season next year. Julianne, experts tell us there's already permanent change in New Mexico due to rising temperatures. But is dealing with climate change still a big enough priority for policymakers in the state? What's your take on that?
I mean, I would say the policymakers in the state could never spend too much time dealing on climate change, especially when it comes to New Mexico's water supplies, which we know have not been really, managed and regulated in a way that's equitable for everyone. We are in big trouble with our use of Colorado River water. We're in litigation with the state of Texas. I think that the more our local policymakers could spend on it, the better.
Mm-hmm. Dan, lawmakers have taken up a lot of bills in the last couple of years on this. There's no doubt about it. I mean, everything from a task force to study the renewable energy job market to the governor's landmark Energy Transition Act. But at the same time, we're still hugely reliant on fossil fuels.
Yeah, that's certainly this tension that has arisen in Santa Fe over the last few years is that the oil and gas industry is almost like the checking account for the state. I mean, that, people in the Southeast, I think, feel like they provide all the revenue and people up north spend all the money. And there's definitely this tension over, transitioning to renewable energy while also trying to support the industry that is providing so much of the state budget. There are also complaints about whether the state is, doing enough. The state engineer, the chief water official recently announced that he would step down. And part of his complaint had to do with a lack of resources for what he sees as, water priorities in the state.
Jessica, Dan set it up well about your part of the world. How has the climate change conversation changed in your region?
Well, I think Dan said it really well when he said that we feel that we make the money down here and Santa Fe spends it. I think that's kind of the pervading feeling. Now, I think that part of that is the fact that we don't talk enough about how the oil and gas industry itself is doing work to address climate change and its impact on this state and in the Permian Basin. The real conversation down here is talking about all of the scientific and actually facilities put in place that will help them reduce their impacts on New Mexico's skies, on New Mexico's water, and when it comes to pollution across the board.
Algernon, how does New Mexico go about threading this needle, this classic problem between feeding the state coffers we're talking about with oil and gas money, while trying to curb greenhouse gas emissions and other things that make quality of life, important?
I think the real difficult part of this conversation is that we're talking about a kind of a transition period where we can diversify revenue streams as well as how we're getting energy into our grid. And that might mean adjustments for a period of time. And I think we're talking a generation or two in terms of not only the revenue picture, but also just what our expectations are as far as the energy that allows us to live the kind of daily life that we like to live. That doesn't necessarily point to scarcity or a kind of catastrophic scarcity of energy, but I think that there's probably going to be adjustments to what we see, how much we drive, how we get that power and how we pay for it, as well as how the state generates the revenue it needs to do schooling, medical services, and all of the things that state funding supports.
Hey, Julianne, can I get you to peel back to the Texas situation for a quick second? I think a lot of folks don't realize how huge this is for us. We've been at this for a number of years about what we owe the state, what we don't owe the state, and there's been accusations that New Mexico has not fought hard enough so far in this issue. What's your sense of where we are with this Texas situation?
Well, I think that's one of the issues. Dan brought up that the state engineer is stepping down at the end of the year. And this state engineer has been, tasked with cooperating with the Attorney General's office to, deal with this massive litigation that is in the United States Supreme Court. And it really boils down to this idea of what do upstream users owe downstream users? And so this argument is that, has New Mexico done enough to send the right amount of water to Texas? Or are we just sort of this victim of circumstance that we're not getting enough water, from the upstream here? There's a lot of nuance in the Supreme Court case. And one of the issues has to do with pumping of groundwater adjacent to, the Rio Grande and the Pecos River in southern New Mexico, and whether those actions that have been allowed by the state engineer had such an adverse effect on the river and on those downstream deliveries that, in fact, New Mexico is responsible for that. And so those are just some of the issues that are being litigated. And this is not going to be the only big water case. There was a big study that was released this week about users of the Colorado River, and the upstream users are shafting the downstream users, and that's the story across the West.
Dan, politically, what's the bounce here? I mean, water, it's been an old joke forever that, we go to war here in the West over water and maybe one other thing. But we have problems. We have a very definite problem. It's going to be really taking a lot of money out of our wallet if we let this sort of get out of control. So let me go back to that question I asked Julianne. This idea that New Mexico has not fought hard enough here. I hear that all the time. What are you hearing on that front?
Yeah, there are some prominent legislators who really feel like the state has not done a good enough job protecting its interests in court. I don't have the expertise to say whether that's a valid claim or not, but there is definitely some nervousness among the legislature about the outcome of these cases, and how well New Mexico has done advocating for New Mexicans.
Is it a resource issue, Dan? Do we just need to throw more money at it, or what's the missing piece here that you're hearing?
That's a good question. Resources are not going to be a good excuse for the legislature going forward, given the volume of money that is pouring into the state from various stimulus packages, federal legislation, and the oil industry is also really pouring in some money. But yeah, we'll have to see. I feel like people are going to be less inclined to give the state a break when it comes to lack of resources.
Good point there. And now we're up to our second biggest story of 2021, education in a pandemic. Schools did reopen to in-person learning this year, of course, but enrollment is still down in our public schools. And there have been plenty of hiccups with MARC requirements, COVID outbreaks, and of course, learning loss. It's not a unique situation to New Mexico, certainly, but in hindsight, Julianne, did we do the right thing by reopening schools in April?
I think the number of parents who said that their children were being adversely affected with educational and social outcomes was really what drove that decision. I think, again, like is always the story, the kids who come from places where they have slow and low internet and they have little or no technology assistance available to them, those are the kids that suffered the most from the remote only learning. And so I think that making the argument that sending everyone back to school to attempt to keep working on equity for education for everyone was the right move. We saw the LFC reported in the fall that New Mexico students lost between 10 and 60 days of education because of the pandemic, because of not being able to access the internet from home, or having 3 kids trying to use the same connection at the same time. There were, I think, a variety of challenges for every family, but that is a big gap to overcome. And those analysts for the legislature said that for many students, for the students that lost the most days, you're looking at it taking like 6 years for them to catch up on that lost time. Wow. So think about how that affects your 3rd grader, who in New Mexico is already historically inclined to be behind, right? So our students at elementary school pre-pandemic, 37% of them were learning at grade level. Wow. Post-pandemic, that number dropped to 31%. I would argue both of those numbers are pretty shameful.
Interesting points there. Jessica, a common theme in a lot of our stories this year, of course, is the urban-rural divide, and that has definitely been true with how schools, and especially school boards, have reacted to the mask mandates. I mean, what do we need to do as a state to get more on the same page? And I'm going to put you on the wall here. In your part of the state, I mean, I've been down south a lot this past summer for various reasons. Ooh, man, the mask thing was such a hot point down there.
Yeah, we have this huge aversion to wearing masks because we're told to wear masks, apparently. Right. But I think that in our school district, you will find people want to do what is right to protect the health and wellness of our children, but they want to see that decision come from locals. So if you're looking at our local school districts, you'll hear them say a lot. Of our local superintendent says, hey, we're not the mask police, but we are asking you kindly to do this. And if not, you have another option, which is to take your child into remote learning, which they still offer. But I think that part of the biggest problem for us is saying we want to see that control back in the hands of our local school districts, of our local superintendents. We want parents to have more of an input. As Julianne said, there was parents who said, hey, this is adversely affecting our children. We want to see them back in a classroom. I think if you go back and ask parents now whether they regret moving their child from remote back into in-class learning, they'll say no, absolutely not. We think this is the path forward for us.
Algernon, students age 5 to 11, of course, can now be vaccinated. How do you think that changes the game in our state? Are parents hearing this and the numbers pointing out that they're taking care of business here?
So initially there was a pretty good jump. It exceeded the State Department of Health's expectations as far as parents wanting to get their kids some protection against COVID-19. And the more warm bodies that are vaccinated, the more of a kind of a firewall we have as far as slowing down the spread and the mutation of the virus. The numbers indicate that has slowed down some, but there's still a pretty strong participation in that. I think it's, as Jessica was pointing out, I think people are motivated to make certain decisions, but they may be less motivated when it's a directive and when they're told to do it. And there's a tricky balance there because There will, of course, be people who decide not to participate in something that arguably has a broad impact on our ability to restore some of what we used to consider normal.
Dan, interesting point there, because colleges and universities, including UNM right here, have also issued vaccine mandates for student, faculty, and staff after some back and forth in getting public input. Was that a prudent course of action in hindsight?
Well, I mean, it's difficult for me to, answer that or opinion, offer an opinion on that. I do think that, it seems like based on all the evidence we have that vaccines are the most powerful tool to slow the spread of the disease, to keep people from, reduce the severity of the disease when people do get it. So I think you're seeing some, a response to that basically these, the vaccines, certainly based on the evidence we have, they seem to be effective and the best weapon we have.
Julianne, boosters, UNM is mandating those as well. Others are as well. Is this going to be another flashpoint here?
Well, I think the state has given some conflicting messaging about what they're going to consider full inoculation. Is it going to be all three, 2 plus a booster for all age groups? And, are different agencies going to adopt different, definitions of full inoculation? I think, that remains to be seen. In Santa Fe, we're at 99% vaccination among adults.
Wow.
And I think that it's, the aversion to the vaccine and the people who absolutely won't get it, who won't consider the boosters, it's really not as much of a factor in our community, I think, as it is in many other places.
Same for 5 to 11. Is Santa Fe is doing well there as well?
We are. I don't know the number off the top of my head, and I'm not sure. Actually, we don't have a county by county breakdown yet for the kids. Right.
A little early. Okay. Jessica, I got to say, the question now is how we move forward and try to make up for the learning loss that we mentioned earlier over the last 2 years that Julianne mentioned. What should educators and policymakers be thinking about at this point?
Well, let me just say that there are still a lot of challenges to actually getting us to a place where we can get caught up. We have a lot of teachers still out of the classroom. We have a lot of substitute teachers in place where there should be full-time teachers. We have lack of resources. We have missing kids. If you guys are watching the news, you know that there are just children who've disappeared out of our school system that we need to find and make sure are safe and can come back to school system. And I think in the future, what we need to do is really just kind of button down and pay a lot of attention to the data that we're getting. Where are our children lacking in terms of learning? We have consistently been at the bottom of education as a state. I don't think anybody is realistically expecting us to catch up overnight or to get back to where we should have been. I think most of us are going to be pretty happy if we can just keep kids in the classroom moving forward and learning. Good point there. Dan, I'm curious what you're hearing at the Roundhouse about the idea of extended school years. Anybody talking about that up there?
Yeah, that has been a huge issue. Wow. The nonpartisan legislative analysts who evaluate education policy have basically repeatedly told the legislature that, time on task, extending learning hours, that those are powerful tools for helping people catch up. And there are some programs that do that. The difficulty has been getting school districts to participate. Teachers are exhausted. They don't want to add, an extra 5 years to the school year or 5 weeks to the school year. It's been difficult to implement it on the ground. But in some ways, legislators have some tools they're considering, financial incentives, they could try something mandatory. I don't know, but this is, one of the most important issues facing the state is how to improve the school system.
Next up on the line, the moment you've all been waiting for, our top story of 2021. Right now, though, some more thoughts on climate change and environmental justice in New Mexico. Our next special guest is Valerie Rangel, author and professor of earth science at Santa Fe University of Art and Design.
I'm Valerie Rangel, author of the 2019 book Environmental Justice in New Mexico Counting Coup. As we approach our second year within the pandemic, we cannot forget about the environmental and public health inequalities, systemic issues of inequality that existed long before this pandemic. systemic issues of equality that have gotten worse through the pandemic, issues that we must all work to change. The greatest public health crisis that was exacerbated during the pandemic was the lack of water infrastructure in rural communities. Recently, the Navajo Nation President Jonathan Nez reported that 40% of residents living within the Navajo Nation do not have running water or sanitation. Many also lack electricity. Places like the Jicarilla Apache Nation have infrastructure, but the pipes contain lead, which contaminate the water and pose a severe health risk to infants, pregnant women, and the elderly. During the lockdown period of the pandemic, residents couldn't travel to border towns to haul back drinking water. The tribe was also denied FEMA assistance by the federal government. That's because their water issues predate COVID-19, so their problems weren't considered an emergency. In the community of Tohajile, less than an hour's drive from the state's largest city, wells run dry most of the year, and people who live there need water pumped from another source. All of these crises overlap with COVID. McKinley and San Juan counties recorded the highest number of COVID cases and deaths in the state. And at the same time, there are many rural towns in these counties that lack running water. They're also within a food desert with few healthcare facilities. These crises also overlap with environmental contamination. McKinley and San Juan counties are also dealing with a 60-year legacy of uranium contamination in western New Mexico, which has made many wells toxic. For decades, the Navajo Nation and its people have suffered disproportionately. Many Navajo uranium workers and their families have become ill, and many have died from diseases associated both with the uranium work itself and with living near uranium mines, mills, and waste dumps. And the largest uranium waste tailing spill occurred on July 16, 1979, near a Navajo community of Church Rock. A recent University of New Mexico study found that over 1/4 of over 700 Navajo Nation women tested had high concentrations of uranium in their bodies. Others, like the Oglala Sioux tribe of South Dakota, the Ute Mountain Ute community of the White Mesa in southeastern Utah, and the Havasu tribe in the Grand Canyon also face threats posed by present-day uranium operations. In the coming year, I hope residents of New Mexico work to make sure the legislature passes a green amendment that would require the state to safeguard people's health and natural resources in future policies and projects across the state, and includes access to water as a basic human right. I'd like the state and tribal leaders to create a comprehensive plan to address uranium contamination instead of piecemeal inadequate cleanup, and stop accepting the most hazardous waste from toxic industries. This is a moment in time that we can build back better, together.
No surprise, but COVID tops our list again this year as the biggest story of 2021. In particular, we want to look at the state's response to the ongoing pandemic, from public health mandates to the vaccination rollout. Let's start there. Algernon, New Mexico continues to have one of the highest vaccination rates in the country, and yet our recent spike in cases has been one of the worst. What do you make of that disconnect? What's going on there?
Well, what health officials are saying is that because New Mexico had so many people get vaccinated early, pretty much as soon as they became available, there was this push to distribute vaccines throughout the state, including the hardest to get to corners. Now we're seeing waning immunity, they feel. And as the virus has spread, mutated, and immunity wanes, you have this prolonged spike in cases, and this is not just New Mexico, a New Mexican problem. This has been a national problem as the virus has moved around, and so now the race is on to figure out how to slow that spread down so that vaccines can get ahead of it, but also to continue having this argument that we're having about how what is expected of all of us as individuals during a public health emergency.
Good point there, yeah. Julianne, Governor Michelle Lujan Grisham recently extended the indoor mask mandate through January 7th. Are those mask mandates still having an impact, or are people just doing what they want to do at this point?
In Santa Fe, I think people are fairly compliant in public spaces, including in outdoor spaces where people are fairly close to one another. I was just looking at some photos from Indian Market over the summer and seeing people and their kind of varying degrees of feeling like it's important to wear a mask outside. But I think if you go into any Santa Fe business, whether it is a coffee shop or restaurant or bookstore or the Target, everyone is complying with the law. You don't see a lot of arguing about it. But there again, I know we're in somewhat of a bubble here, and that's not even the case. When I go to visit, to Harris and Edgewood and those areas, people don't feel the same about it, and they're not as willing to comply with the state law.
Are you having an issue still in Santa Fe with folks visiting? I don't want to pick on Texas here, but there was a time where a lot of Texans were coming to Red River, Santa Fe, a lot of northern New Mexico places, and really not having it with the mask mandates by the governor. Is that still happening in Santa Fe?
I mean, I think if you're walking into a business in Santa Fe, you're being asked to wear a mask, and there's very few people who are trying to buck that. If you're out on the sidewalk downtown, you're still very close to people who think that it's okay to just, rip it off when you're outside. That seems to be the sticking point. And again, the law does not require you to wear a mask when you're outside. And so that is that's where you see, I think, the most conflict. But the tourists, the visitors, no matter where they're from, when you walk in the front door and there's a sign that says, please put on your mask, I really don't think you can argue with that if you want to do your business there.
Exactly right. Dan McKay, 7 hospitals are so overwhelmed with cases that they've moved to crisis standards of care here in New Mexico. How bad would it have to get, do you think, for the governor to go back to even more restrictive conditions like we saw in the early days of the pandemic?
Well, she has made it pretty clear, and her staff, they have all made it pretty clear that they do not want to go back to capacity limits on businesses. How many tools they have at their disposal, is an open question. I think they're trying to do what they can while not, restricting businesses again. The mask mandate has been a point of controversy. I think she's definitely faced some political, criticism on that point. But they have not, the administration has not signaled at all that it is interested in moving schools back to remote learning or imposing business restrictions. We'll have to see whether there's anything that changes that.
Algernon, I want to bring back this urban-rural divide question, as nowhere that's been more clear than mask and vaccination mandates. Was there something the governor and other leaders could have done differently to try and fight this pandemic back when, while also making rural communities part of the solution and getting buy-in?
Well, I think really I don't know that I think the divide between how rural communities and urban communities understand the risks and the options can be overstated based on just some of the stereotypes that we hold. I think that for rural communities, really, it was just a matter of having access. However people felt about vaccines, however people felt about, the issue remains just access to healthcare services when needed. And I think that even is a problem for people in some rural communities. When you have people who live in Las Cruces that need to travel to Albuquerque for some kinds of healthcare, these problems are not isolated to a community or a particular type of community. They're really shared across the state. Likewise with schools, I think that what the pandemic has shown us is just the extent to which schools are dependent upon to deliver a number of services and security for our children across the state, rural and urban. And so I think this is one issue where I think that line we draw between rural and urban sort of consciousness of our problems, I think it's a little bit more broad than that. And really what is relevant there is just the difference in terms of access. to information and to services.
Gotcha. Jessica, one of the more infamous, if you want to use that word, mask mandates, or mandates, I should say, was regarding the state fair from the governor this past year. Very interesting reaction. Of course, we had the Alt State Fair for the 4-H kids in Roswell, which seemed to be a big hit, actually, and my big concern is that becomes permanent now that folks have seen there's another way to do these things. But I'm curious, with the state fair particularly, what were you hearing back then? Because, boy, I was hearing some really hard stuff. A lot of folks took this as a personal affront from the governor and really were personally hurt by this.
You're talking about a beloved state tradition, right? So people are going to have very strong feelings about it either way to begin with. But I think you're right. We viewed what happened, that separation, holding our own mini state fair down south as a success. And maybe part of that was at the very beginning, there was a lot of confusion about what would be allowed and not be allowed in terms of being a participant at the state fair, right? What were the rules and regulations that accompanied having our children go out and show their animal at the state fair? We tend to look at it in terms of, we're just looking for alternate solutions. We just want to be able to do those normal things that Algernon mentioned before in a normal manner and give those experiences to our kids and to our families and bring them back to our state. I think that if the state persists in mask mandates and vaccination requirements, that you're going to see a lot more people turn to alternate solutions or finding not necessarily ways around it, but ways that they can continue to engage in these activities without the need or the blessing of the state.
Right. Well, it's a tough call down there. It's amazing what happens when you have to, do things that it's not popular. Dan, go ahead, Jessica. It's my fault.
I'm sorry. I was just going to say it was super encouraging to see, though, how many people participated, but on their own took up this vaccination and mask use themselves. There
you go. Love that. Hey, Dan McKay, the governor's race is already heating up for next year. We all know that, with Governor Michelle Lujan Grisham, of course, seeking re-election. But Kara Huey, weatherman Mark Ronchetti jumping into the fray as well. How do you see the COVID pandemic and the governor's response playing into the race?
Oh, I think it'll be a huge issue. It's something that touches every single New Mexican, and these policy choices aren't easy ones to make. And you even seen, it's not like Democratic governors have all responded the same way. There is debate within, every state over how to handle vaccine mandates and mask mandates and things like that. Governor Lujan Grisham has been on the aggressive side when it comes to requiring masks and vaccines. So yes, I do think it'll be a huge issue, and kind of the broader political environment may favor Republicans, given that there's a Democrat in the White House. That's always kind of a national climate that affects local races. Whether that will make the race more competitive than it was last time, we don't know, but COVID almost certainly will be a top issue.
Good point there. What was your top story of 2021? Head to any of our social media channels to let us know. You can find us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube. Now, before we wrap up this week's show, we want to bring you a voice of the future and her thoughts on addressing climate change here in New Mexico. She is a UNM Sustainability Studies student and took part in a recent protest on campus demanding the UNM Foundation divest its interest in fossil fuel industries.
My name is Sofia Jenkins Nieto. I'm 21 years old and I'm in my 4th year of undergrad at UNM. I study environmental science and sustainability studies, and I'm also part of the Student Steering Committee for UNM Leaders for Environmental Action and Foresight, also called UNM LEAF. We are a group of students, staff, faculty, retirees, and UNM community members trying to push UNM to use their power as a Research One institution and the flagship university of our state to act on climate change. We believe UNM can use its power by investing in environmentally aware education and research, becoming a carbon and waste-free campus, and encouraging the UNM Foundation to divest their endowment from fossil fuels and reinvest in renewable energy. I have been aware of climate change my entire life, ever since I can remember. I want to learn how to solve the climate crisis, and my whole life revolves around this. In class, I learn about the science and politics of climate change, and through my work with LEAF, I try to get people to listen to me, to understand that not only is climate change a real threat that will destroy our futures, but is already displacing people and destroying environments all around the world. I'm told by adults that I'm so young, I have my whole life ahead of me, that I have all the time in the world. But for people my age, that future is uncertain because of the threats climate disasters pose to our livelihoods. I want to make a difference for our planet, but I also want to see my 30s and maybe have kids someday, so that I can see the world and have it not be on fire. This seems simple to me. I'm fighting for my life. My life is worth fighting for. The lives of my generation and the generations to come are worth fighting for. Our planet is worth fighting for.
Thanks again for joining us and for staying informed and engaged. And thanks for sticking with us through another challenging year. We're looking forward to the time we can welcome all of our guests and line panelists back into our studio. But that, of course, will be dictated by COVID safety protocols. Until then, thanks for bearing with our virtual solution. It's hard to imagine just a few years ago that our broadcast would rely on teleconferencing technology like Zoom and WebEx, but we're thankful for those tools that help us continue to have important conversations of the day. We'll see you again next week and next year in Focus.
Funding for New Mexico in Focus provided by the McCune Charitable Foundation and viewers like you.